was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
The thoughts were all alone in this empty void. The head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris, 3 fingers, 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
All right, guys. Well, we are here on Conspirinormal. We are starting out the show with the guest today. Because it is 11 o'clock for us, and again, 5 o'clock to calling someone in Ireland this time. And we have Marty Stalker on the line, and he is the director of the Netflix, the film that is on Netflix, the documentary film called Hostage to the Devil. Marty, welcome to Conspirinormal. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, great to be on, mate. Great to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to kind of want to go through your background first, where you are, where you're based out of, and how you became interested in the subject of what we're going to talk about tonight, which is Malachi Martin. How did that come to be an interest to you?
It was about 5 years ago. I was approached by some film producers in Northern Ireland, based in Belfast, and they approached me about. They'd seen some of my previous short film work, etc., and they approached me about doing a documentary about this former Kerryman, former Jesuit priest called Father Malachi Martin. So that was about just over 5 years ago now. So so it's been a long passion project, but it was my first feature project. So I just jumped at it really, and I was itching to do my first feature, or basically to prove myself at the feature film length.
Sure. Had you had any interest in Malachi Martin before? Had you had any kind of idea of who he was and what he was about?
So the two film producers in question who approached me actually wanted to do a feature film about the man, but unfortunately nobody outside of small parts of America really knew who he was, and for them to base a feature film about this man was a bit of a gamble. So they thought about using the documentary as a springboard into more content surrounding the man. So it's a very clever move. So but previously no, I'd heard nothing about the man, and he was from Kerry, which is a few hours down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it was. It was a shock that I'd never heard about this man before, but for me, it was a dream come true to research about this man in question.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely an interesting person for sure. Let's talk about his life and talk about his background and some of the things that you found out about him.
Yeah.
What was the kind of what stood out, and what stood out for you most with him? About him that stood out to you?
I think, when I first got on board the project, to be fair, I spent the first 2 years trying to prove facts about the man. There were a lot of misconceptions in the internet.
Right.
I soon discovered the internet is not a good platform to research about somebody's life. There's all sorts of Catholic forums and tinfoil hat forums and conspiracy theories and rabbit holes. So for me, it was I needed to reach out to people who actually met the man in person and to actually, had spent time with the man. That was important. So I spent a good 2 years just trying to prove fact after fact after fact. And the Vatican's more closed down than the CIA are. So trying to get information out of them, squeeze information out of them was difficult. And so for me, it was obvious, whoever had met this man in person, Malachi Martin had touched them in some way, in a positive way. He was a spiritual director to many. Don't forget, he arrived in America after the Second Vatican Council, and there was a lot of American Catholics at the time who were just disillusioned with where the church was going and the faith was going, and he answered a lot of questions. He became the front man to answer questions about the Second Vatican Council. And obviously, as some of your viewers, some of your listeners will know, that he actually left during the Second Vatican Council stage. He just felt disillusioned himself, and he's a traditional Catholic in his faith, and he just found the whole modernizing of the church just an absolute sort of backwards way to go.
Now, he was a Jesuit, correct?
That's correct, yeah. He was the special forces of the Catholic faith, yes.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of weird conspiracy theories about the Jesuits. Oh, yes. I'm very familiar. And there's some good things about them as well that you hear. If you've ever seen the movie The Mission, that's a movie I filmed mostly about the Jesuits. And some of the actual good things that they did. I guess it paints the Jesuits in a good light. I guess you could say that. But he also was, one of the claims that he made was that he worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, that was correct. That is correct. I mean, that was one fact that I could prove, that he actually was working on the Dead Sea Scrolls when he said he was.
Yeah, that was something that I had never heard about him before. I think I had briefly heard that he was a Jesuit, but that he had actually been a part of that group was pretty amazing.
And this is why Father Martin was always compared to Father Merrin in Blatty's The Exorcist. So, and that's. I mean, I don't believe that's true, but a lot of press, particularly in the UK, when the film was released last month, or they just found the correlations between Father Merrin's character and Father Malachi Martin. You know, as he is an archaeologist and worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then he looked at Father Merrin's character, and they just made their own sort of mind up in a sense.
Yeah, Father Merrin at the beginning of the Exorcist film, working in Iraq, doing the archaeological digs. Right. And so was he in Rome at that certain point during the Second Vatican Council?
Yeah, he was in Rome. He was right-hand man to Cardinal Bayer, Augustine Bayer, who was a German cardinal. So he was in the heart and soul of the Vatican as this massive change was happening. And obviously, he amongst other hundreds of nuns and priests left in their droves. So it was a very important, well, to some people it's a very important event in the Catholic faith.
Well, let's talk about Vatican II. I mean, let's talk about what that is. I mean, kind of establish the background there about what happened with the Vatican, kind of the reform of the Vatican. And this takes place, I believe, in the early 60s.
Yeah, well, 1959 to be precise, but then it took a few years to actually modernize and to rewrite the liturgies, etc. Yeah, so it was a massive time. Had a massive impact on the Catholic faith, and Father Martin was getting stuck in as well, and soon realised that this was not the way he wanted to go, and left.
What certain things changed during Vatican II?
Oh, it's trying to simplify this, trying to get this.
Sure.
Get this across.
It is complex. It is.
Yeah, it's extremely complex. But the way we describe it in my film is they just tried to get with the modern world. They tried. They felt like they were. A lot of people felt alienated with the Catholic faith, and they wanted to sort of modernize even the way the liturgies were written, and what Father Martin felt. It was just going in a direction that which he felt it was weakening the faith, and especially the liturgies themselves. It was just that's the sort of easiest way to explain it. But obviously, it took a long time to happen, and there was a lot of intricate sorts of incidents which happened in there. But that's the way I describe it in a sort of elevator pitch is just they just try to modernize the faith.
Right. A lot of people don't realize just what, happened there. And you have a priest in the film that talks about how in the 1950s, a lot of people were either converting to the Catholicism, people were kind of coming to it in droves, and then the Vatican Council hits, and I believe that it lasts a couple of years before they come out with the whole Vatican II concept. And he says in the film, then all of a sudden that just kind of stopped, and people began to seek other means, I suppose,
It's a traditionalist Catholics who just felt like, the modernizing of these reforms, it was just they felt it was so detrimental to their faith and left, and as I said before, in droves, and it was just it wasn't a great time for them, and they just saw what they were seeing in front of them was not the faith that they had committed to from day one. So
so how did Malachi's his viewpoints on traditional Catholicism differ from mainstream Catholicism after Vatican II? What would be some of the differences that you saw?
He was, to be fair, Father Martin's views, his traditional Catholic views, had never changed before or post Vatican II. His faith always remained the same, and obviously he always talked about bloodstained guilt, and he was very strong on his views about abortion and homosexuality, etc. It's very obviously to some very, very controversial views, etc. So we're very very traditional. The traditional mass was important to him. He felt like the rewrite and the mass which now happened after Vatican II was weak, and he would when he was in America he would perform his own mass privately, and that was a traditional mass. And since Vatican II, it was just a whole rewrite, and he just felt like this was not this is not the way of what God wants them to. It's very in the film we touch on it very briefly just to give a background of Father Martin and so we don't go too much into it to be fair.
Yeah. So, he comes to the United States. About how old is he when he comes to the U.S., to New York City?
Ooh, so he arrives, I think it was about 1969, I believe. Let me just check. It was 1969, I believe. So, I'm not sure how old he was. I can't do the maths now right now. But yeah, so he arrived about 1969.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry, wrong. 1966. Sorry.
Probably in his 40s. Probably in his maybe late 30s, early 40s. I would probably say. I think he was born in the 20s. Yeah. So, what were his views on exorcism? He also had this concept of perfect possession. I mean, what did that mean? What did that mean to him?
Well, perfect possession was one of two things which Father Martin really, really sort of made him, sit up at night and to be extremely scared of, which was perfect possession and also generational Satanism. It was the first one being perfectly possessed. He said he's only met a handful in his life, but it's the willingness they accept Satan in their lives, and it's nothing strange. It's a full acceptance of they accept it in and nothing. It's not alien to them. This is normal, and they live everyday lives, and some in very, very powerful positions and roles. But he would say that he would just they were just seeing them walking around the streets, and just these perfectly possessed humans walking around the subways and the streets of New York as well. It just creeped him out, and obviously generational Satanism being families worshipping Satan and passing it on to generations of family members, just like that worshipping God. For them, worshipping Satan was normal. Again, it was just this acceptance of the devil and Satan in their lives, and that was passed down from generation to generation. So we had children born into this environment, which scared him. And he said in the 70s it was rife with satanic rituals and occult activity.
Yeah. How could he tell someone was perfectly possessed? Did he have, I guess, through the training that he could probably tell?
Yeah, I think one of the things one of the sort of criteria in the film we look at is sometimes it's not what you see on camera or sometimes what you see with your own eyes. It's the sense in the room. It's this atmosphere in the room where you just know when you're in the room with somebody. It's this different sense that you've got. You just know. And he would always say, like, it's more about an experience rather than seeing it. If you know what I mean, it's experience it in that room. And he would also see a little. They would let him in for a very short space of time, a little, like a shutter on a camera. He would just see something which was not right, and he would let him in for a little tiny sort of half a split second, and that to him was just was enough. And there is actually a story which I couldn't prove in the film, which is about David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who believed that he had summoned Father Martin to his cell, and because he wanted Father Martin to write his biography. So it was a difficult time, and it was just when Hostage of the Devil came out and became a bestseller, and Father Martin became the go-to man about possession, and obviously Berkowitz at the time believed he was perfectly possessed, but trying to find that record of Father Martin signing in was crucial to me, but I just couldn't get that evidence. So, but yeah, he was. Well, what I found about Father Martin was he was very real about the whole thing. There was no sensationalism. He wasn't on an ego trip, and this was a real battle to him. And
right.
And it's the question in the film. Was he God's warrior? Did he tell the truth? Or was he telling the truth, or was he an absolute sociopath who riding on using the media to for money purposes and to bring more revenue into the house? But as an audience member, it's a unique experience when you watch it, and I can't answer every question for you. So at the end of the film, we're only scratching the surface. So at the end of the film, you'll have a sort of idea of who you thought the man was.
Yeah, and he was definitely accused of sensationalism.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think particularly when Hostage of the Devil came out, obviously there's an element in the film where we see William Blatty, who was not happy because it was 3 years after the release of the book, and there is a lot of reports of the first sort of critical reviews of the book were not very nice at all. So at the time, William Blatty believed that he should be the only one writing about the subject matter at the time. I don't know why, but this is what he believed, and he wrote a very scathing review about the book, and Father Martin was accused of being sensational, because at the end of the day, and that was from my own investigations, exorcism is quite a mundane practice. It's quite a mundane experience. It's prayer. It's not what you see in the movies, because obviously movies are trying to sell entertainment. So. And most of the time, some exorcisms can last up to 2 years, even longer. So it's not, it doesn't happen over a weekend or over an evening. So it's quite a mundane and lengthy process. And I think, like me and Maliki, similar to Maliki, at the end of the day, we are selling entertainment. So we do need to sort of find a middle ground with, do we go sensational with it and authentic? Do we try and find that middle ground? And think about both of us sort of try to do that in our work.
Sure. And definitely, the way that he described it, he talked a little bit, you do show a clip of him talking about The Exorcist, and he said, that there are some of the things, everything you see in that movie is true. There's the head spinning around a complete 360. You don't see that. But there were other aspects to him that were true, but he did kind of also downplay it a little bit as well, because definitely, you see that movie, it's Hollywood for sure. Oh, yeah. It's probably one of the scariest films ever made, but it's definitely Hollywoodized, and you definitely get that, that's sensationalist as well, right?
You get like an exorcist who in 20 years of being an exorcist has seen one manifestation, which was, for example, a child levitating off the floor. But that's one in 20 years of service. So, right. And when I first was approached for the project, I was initially going, right, let's hook up a room full of cameras and let's bring in a real exorcist and person who was suffering, and let's document this real exorcism. But at the end of the day, the likelihood of actually recording anything was quite low. But also, even if we did somehow, miraculously record a manifestation, people would still think we've rigged the room up with ropes or wires or CGI anyway.
Right,
so
right.
There's no point. And like I said before, one of the elements in the film is it's about experience. It's not about what you see. It's having your own unique experiences with this area.
Well, the priest that you interview in the film, that also was talking about Vatican II that we just mentioned. I mean, he brought up a good point, and something that I never thought of before, that baptism is a form of exorcism.
Yeah, that when he brought that up in the interview, I was like you, I was like, wow. And I did a little bit of research, and he's totally right. And yeah, that for me also was my education on the subject increased as well while making this. So, no, it was a great point.
Yeah, because when you think about it just a little bit, when you extend it just a little bit, you say, "Yeah, he's right. That is true. That is exactly what it is." You do mention in the film the exorcism of Annalise Michel.
Yes.
Do you have any? Because that's the film. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is based off of that film, is based off of that event. Do you have any, what's your personal opinion on that case?
Ooh. Well, first of all, the reason for adding that small section in the film is just looking at the responsibilities that priests and exorcists and bishops, have with these cases. And one of the sort of key points in the film is that the exorcist in Rome would say 90+% of his cases can be explained and cured by science. So they are very thorough in their investigations before they even get involved themselves. So science will always come first. And with the Annalise case, it's the photographs which get me, the recorded photographs, and I spent a lot of time listening to the audio.
How can you do that, man?
Yeah, I know. I've spent 5 years listening to the subject matter, and obviously it was in German, but I had an English transcription, and I was reading along as she was mentioning stuff like Hitler, and so it was just if you can try and find it online, it's a fascinating read. Some of the stuff that comes out with, and again, I just don't want to. I just can't. I just don't know. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't there. Yeah, I would have more of an. I think I would have more of an understanding if I was actually there and working on the case myself. But no, it's just it's a very, very fine line, and I'm just as baffled and bemused as the next person. So I don't have a definitive answer. It's not a cop out answer, but I just don't have a definitive answer.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a hard one. It really is, because you really think about the fact that what was she mentally ill, or was she actually possessed, or was it somewhere in between? And then did the priests, were they possibly feeding into a mental illness that was already there? You really ultimately really don't know. Honestly.
It's so difficult. It's so difficult. And this is why priests and exorcists and bishops in the diocese just have to be extremely careful. And what Father Martin was facing was obviously after the release of films like The Exorcist and The Omen, etc. You can imagine the confessional boxes were rammed the next day with people believing they were possessed, or neighbors or siblings or etc. were possessed, and a lot of the churches in the area just closed their doors in every case, and that's why Father Martin set up his underground movement of exorcists at the time. So it was. Yeah, it's so difficult. It's so difficult. But I think with thorough investigation first, you do try and you do see a light at the end of it all. But no, I think it's such a difficult area, and this is why the church will always come in last, in a sense.
Yeah, true. I want to talk about some of the people that you interviewed in the film that were friends of Father Martin, and let's also talk about one of his biggest critics. I believe the guy's last name was Kaiser, the older gentleman in the film. But let's talk about his friends, some of the people that he worked with. I think Ken Morrow, Sarchi. is another one that kind of became big. So there was a film about him that came out a few years ago, which is a pretty decent little movie.
Deliver Us from Evil. So Ralph Sarchi, Ralph, like all of Malachi Martin's friends, were extremely protective of their mentor stroke friend. You know, Father Martin was extremely important in their lives and answered a lot of questions for them at the time. So they were initially very, very protective. And some friends who, you know, didn't make the film were for me a little bit overprotective, and that came across quite quickly. That you know, from day one I was always saying, you know, this is going to be as balanced as I can. This is going to be as objective. I have to be as objective as I can, because nobody wants to watch a film and to be, you know, to be swung one way rather than sort of give them the sort of critical voice in the film as well. So his friends at first, they reached out. Some of them reached out to us because with the joy of the internet, everybody knows your business. So they found out we were making a film, so they reached out to us first, and first of all, very protective, but also very selecting who we thought we should speak to. So I just phoned everybody and emailed everybody, and over time I started to sort of triage the people who I was going to interview, because you know we're always playing against time when you're making films. You're always battling against the lack of time to get things in the can, as we say. So the people left in the film were the likes of Ralph Sarchi, demonologist in New York, ex sergeant in the NYPD, done a lot of years. You know, gave his life to the service, and now he's given his life to the world of demonology. And we've also got Robert Marrow, who has a very secretive past, which I won't spoil it for the audience who haven't watched the film yet. Who he would always call himself Malachi's driver. You know, at the end of the day, he was best friends with Malachi, but he'd always class himself as his driver. He would take him to and from his exorcisms and also his other priestly duties at the time. And then there was others like obviously Art Bell, although the two of them had never met. They spent hours and hours on the phone together talking about all sorts of things. So they became close as well. And I was lucky enough to get Art Bell on camera, which was great. And John Zavers, similar to Ralph, you know, it was a big mentor in John's life as well. And
yeah, we've had John on this show.
Oh, great. Yep. Brilliant. So after Hostage of the Devil came out, the book, John felt that was the go-to book at the time in the 70s for demonology, etc. So, and we've got little snippets of Lorraine Warren as well, and so this was a man who was looked up to with probably America's number one paranormal sort of arena at the time. So yeah, so I was to be honest, I was spoiled for choice of who I had on camera. And at the end of the day, I don't want this to be a 2-3 hour epic sort of documentary. And people already are investing their time in the film. So, and as you'll find out by the end of it, we're only scratching the surface about the man. And it has left a lot of questions open, which is frustrating to many. But it's literally, we're only scratching the surface for obvious reasons.
Well, I think that's good because it allows for people to go and research and
some research,
do their research on it. Now, this gentleman, Kaiser, I don't remember his first name, but
Robert Blair Kaiser.
Yeah, this is the person that is the critic of the group. I guess that he had. It seemed strange because he had a real friendship with Martin. They were friends, and then there was some kind of something that happened with Kaiser's wife.
Yeah. And he's very polite about it.
Right. But he was extremely critical of Martin, said that he was a charlatan. What was your impressions of him? What did you think of him?
Bob came into the scene like a wrecking ball, as you'll see in the film. He also comes in like a wrecking ball. And years ago, I'd been speaking to Bob on the phone and a lot of times, and he, in my naivety, he asked me the question, and I answered. This is the question he asked me. He said, "So what do you, Marty? He was trying to suss me out. Basically, he was like, well, so what do you think about the man?" And this is very early on in my research, and I was like, I tried to sort of bluff my way through, and I said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to remain on the fence about the man." And he sort of laughed down the phone, and he was like, "You know, you cannot make a film and remain on the fence about this man. You either one side of the fence or the other." So, and he was totally right. Over the years of further research, and also as a filmmaker and writer, you need to make that decision. You know, you can remain as objective as you can, you know, but you are going to sway very subliminally sometimes, and in very minor ways. You are going to sway to certain way, either pro or anti man. So he was very, very fascinating to speak to. He's obviously best friends with Father Martin during the Vatican days, became best friends. He was also a Jesuit himself, I believe, from the late 40s onwards, and then became a correspondent for Time magazine and wrote a few great articles and some books. And I just felt the need to have him on camera. And it was sort of 2 weeks before the main shoot, and he rang me up again and said, "Marty, you need to come quick. I'm dying. I'm in a hospice. And you need to come quick." So obviously made sure that Bob was the first one on the list when we arrived in America, in Arizona. He was the first guy to get on camera. So, and I went up to his hospice with our production man, with our producer, US producer, and we banged the interview out, and you know, you could still tell, there was a little glint in his eye when he was speaking to me. You could still tell he respected the man. He respected Malachi. He respected, he would never say it to your face, but he just knew that he still had fond feelings about the man, even though a lot of things he was saying was quite, you know, was extremely critical. You could just see in there that, you know, he was, you know, he still had that little bit of respect for him, and you would do, you know, spent so many years in the Vatican together, and
sure,
and you know, spent a lot of time researching together and talking and partying, etc. So yeah, so unfortunately, you know, 3 weeks after the interview, he passed away. But I'm also getting a lot of complaints about why I had Bob in the film at all, and just for me, he provides that critical anchor. He asks a lot of questions and answers a lot of questions, which a lot of the audience who doesn't know Malachi will have in the back of their minds as well. So, although we have a lot more friends than foes in the film, he was still important to have in the film as well, and just a demonstration of how controversial Malachi Martin was during his life and after his life, when he passed away. Sorry.
Yeah, you got to have somebody that is. Someone that is, I don't know, that I would say he's impartial, because definitely not, but somebody that can kind of bring a little bit of a critique to it. I felt kind of like, well, that he says that Malachi Martin slept with his wife. I felt like, okay, this guy may be a little bit biased. There might be a little bit of a problem here, but
Malachi Martin, you know, and I'm not talking about just female friends here. They would always say that he was just extremely charismatic in the way he would be at dinner parties, telling stories, the way he interacted with others. He just oozed charisma, and he was extremely intelligent. And I felt with Bob and Malachi, there was a lot of, well, particularly just one way actually with Bob's views of Malachi. I felt Bob was extremely jealous of, one, Malachi, the personality, and two, Malachi, the writer. You know, he was, you can imagine sort of, you know, Malachi being, you know, surrounded at dinner parties in the Vatican, and he's telling his stories in his Irish way and lovable way, and telling cracking jokes, and sometimes, you know, the odd sort of dirty joke here and there as you know, as it happens. And I just felt like there was a lot of jealousy there in the back of Bob's heart, basically. Yeah,
you think there's like a Salieri Amadeus kind of thing going on there? Yeah. Friendship, but rivalry at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Rob, do you have any questions you want to ask? Or this is Rob, by the way. I forgot to introduce him earlier.
Hey, Marty, nice to meet you.
Hi, good to see you, mate.
As far as questions, no. It's great, first of all, to talk to someone who's managed to dig so deep into this and separate, you know, a lot of the fact from fiction. And
I went for a Rob. to get there, though.
Yeah. But no, I just want to say I really appreciate that. And it's a fascinating topic. He was a fascinating man.
Right. He was an absolute joy to make a film about, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's a hell of a subject. I want to talk about some things that are not in the film.
Okay.
And some things that may be, I guess because his writings and his things that he talks about were so vast and there were so many things. And really in the film, I think you really wanted to focus on the exorcism aspect.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But there were some other aspects that I want to talk about. And one of those, two of them, but one of them, the first one I will talk about is Fatima.
Yeah.
And the third secret.
Getting a lot of stick for not putting that in the film, but that's a documentary in itself, to be honest.
Right. Exactly. I mean, you have that exorcism aspect of Malachi Martin, and then you have this more kind of conspiracy theory aspect of Malachi Martin.
Yeah.
And the things that he talked about.
Black Mass in the Vatican, basically.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a second. But the third secret of Fatima. And this is interesting stuff because we've talked a little bit about Fatima on this show before. And in some ways, there's almost a UFO aspect to Fatima, the miracle of the sun. We've talked about that. But what was his idea about the third secret of Fatima?
You have to ask him about that. He mentioned he used to talk about it to Robert Marrow, who was his driver, but even he never told me anything about that. Apparently Art Bell, he told a few things to Art Bell over the phone about the subject matter, and again, when I asked Art Bell the same question, he refused to tell me anything about it. So this is pretty locked down. But so I'm like you, I'm my own research. This is why I couldn't make that a strand of the film. Was just I just couldn't find anybody who was willing to tell me anything at all. So unfortunately, it's not the answer you wanted. But no, it still fascinates me, and it's still in the back of my mind. And again, that's a spin-off. That's a film in itself, a documentary in itself as well.
Well, actually, it generates another question. Why do you think they're so secretive about it?
Because. Oh, it's like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know the third secret of Fatima is supposed to be, and you have the first secret, and the first secret I think has to do with some kind of event. The second secret has to do with some kind of like something about Russia, because all this took place in 1917 during World War I, right before the Russian Revolution. And then the third secret is supposedly the Pope, something happening to the Pope or a Pope, which they said was fulfilled. I think was fulfilled by Pope John Paul II being assassinated. But then Malachi Martin and others have said, no, that's not what it is. It's supposedly some other really horrible event that is supposed to happen in the future. And the Vatican and the popes are covering it up. That's as I understand it in a nutshell. Yeah. Well,
there is a radio broadcast. Malachi does talk about. I mentioned before about his boss, Cardinal Bayer. He was outside the room at the time as there was all sorts of arguing and shouting going on next door, and he was sort of sat outside with his little satchel, waiting for his boss to come out and he'd always say he'd never seen his boss, Cardinal Bayer, look so angry and he was just, there was something going on in that room, and he, it's the fact that he describes that the third secret of Fatima was written on a sheet of paper, just one sheet of paper. It was incredible, and it obviously had to be translated. It was written in Portuguese, etc.
Right.
For all those in the room, and Malachi was in the room as it was being translated. So that's how he was involved, and obviously kept that with him. And unfortunately, Art Bell was a closed door, and some of his friends were sort of locked in what they would disclose to me as well. So it was a shame, really. But it's one of those. Yeah, again, just like Malachi, wrapped in mystery, even now.
Did you find yourself frustrated by that a little bit, or?
Yeah, because that could have been a massive. But I'm
Sure.
selfishly, I just thought that could have been an extremely interesting section of the film, and also, it's similar to the David Berkowitz encounter in the jail. That could have been such a great section of the film, but no, it's just first of all, no, I just couldn't get the evidence or the proof, and it's extremely frustrated as a storyteller as well. I just thought this could have been an exceptional part of the film, but I just couldn't justify putting on screen, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean by the frustration. Sometimes people will tell you these tantalizing little things, and then you're like, but what can you tell me more? So that's kind of how it is. And sometimes with the conspiracy, community, and especially when it becomes wrapped in religion, you can run into a brick wall at a certain time. They just give you enough to just make you really interested. And I guess go ahead.
On Malachi's death, he was actually writing his most controversial novel to date, which was, I believe, his 16th novel. I could be wrong, but his last book, it was about the Catholic faith and the New World Order. And Malachi would always write it in long form and handwrite his notes on the old printer paper, which you see in the film. He just handwrites his novels, his books, and his articles, and somebody else will have to type out for him. That's the way that was his method of writing. And there was, I believe, manuscripts of hundreds of pages of this new novel, which, according to his friends who he talked to about it, was going to be his most controversial to date. And for all those sort of conspiracy theorists out there, this is going to be great for them. But literally on his death, his whole apartment was stripped out. It was cordoned off and stripped out, and there was no trace of this manuscript ever found. And that, again, that is an interesting area of his life as well.
Yeah. Who stripped out the apartment?
Well, there's a few. So he was living with the Livanos families, Kaki Livanos, who was his landlady, who owned the building, and I believe that, according to his literary agent, she just got rid of all his stuff, sent it off to down the road to the charity shop, and that's one theory. But also another theory is that people came in and stripped it out and took all the good stuff out and left the apartments empty. So. Again, even on his death, he's still stranded in mystery, and he's an enigma to this day.
Yeah, it was the Jesuits. Had to have been.
We were told 6 years ago, the producers were told 6 years ago in Dublin that by the Jesuits that we wouldn't be allowed to make this film. So we were like, okay.
Oh, the plot thickens. Well, that will bring us to the Black Mass in the Vatican.
Oh, lovely.
So that's one of the big things. Like I remember Art Bell being on the radio, and I can remember maybe hearing Malachi Martin a couple of times in the mid to late 90s. And that was the big thing, was the Black Mass in the Vatican. And supposedly, I don't know when was that supposed to have taken place? The 60s?
Yeah, the 60s. It was actually during the Second Vatican Council, the height of the Second Vatican Council in Rome, I believe.
Right. And there was somehow there was a coordination by telephone with another Black Mass in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah, of all places.
So the Freemasons were involved, because that's supposedly that's where Albert Pike started the Freemasonry, or Scottish Rite Freemasonry rather. And, very interesting. There's like 3 conspiracy theories, I think, they're in one. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are quite strong, hence why I'm hopefully going to be working with 2 other producers on getting Windswept House. We're trying to get Windswept House made into some sort of I don't know what it is yet.
Which is one of his novels, right? I think.
Windswept House is one of his novels. Yes, he talks about this.
Okay.
He always wrote in a factional sense, so based on fact. And
Yeah.
his friends would always ask him, why do you always write in this, factional sense, and in a factional way? And he always say, I want to keep my kneecaps. And that was his answer. So, he was very careful as well in who he wrote about, and changed the names over for obvious reasons. But I do, if you are interested in Malachi Martin, and I would definitely recommend the top 3 of his books being, Windswept House, being in that top 3, definitely.
Yeah, I was reading about that the other day. You could really do that up. I mean, that could be like Your Eyes Wide Shut.
Exactly, yeah. There's all sorts of threats and all sorts of layers going on. So, and obviously Pope Paul VI is, his famous statement is, the smoke of Satan has entered the sanctuary. So it's very dramatic, but very chilling times if it was true.
Yeah, I mean, you really can't discount it, can you?
No.
In many ways. I mean, knowing some of the things that, what we've talked about on this show, and I'm sure that you've heard, you really can't discount it.
No.
About exorcisms, how have your viewpoints on that changed? Have they changed in first studying this man, studying exorcisms, and then making this film?
I think I've become, this might sound strange, but I think I've become more skeptical with the whole thing, and very what I see, what I listen to, and what I'm told. I'm very much more skeptical about the whole thing, and not in a negative way. It's just that I've been speaking to these exorcists in Rome, for example, who are very, very careful about approaching cases, and they have to be careful themselves from legal reasons as well. So I'm skeptical. I do believe in extremely, extremely rare cases which science just cannot explain. I do believe that there is something, not of this world involved, and and hopefully that doesn't come across too much in the film, being subjective, as objective as I can be.
Right.
But sometimes your beliefs do filter out now and again. However, generally I believe I've become more skeptical in the whole subject matter.
Has it in any way? Well, you have become more skeptical, but at the same time, do you feel that it may have strengthened your faith in some ways?
Oh yeah, it's been a 5-year passion project for me, but it's also been an educational journey, but also a journey of my own faith as well. And it has slowly, fortified what I believe in, and it has been a spiritual journey as well. Not to sound too cheesy, but it had to be really, looking at what I was researching at the time, and what I'm still getting people contacting me out the woodwork, and I feel like I feel like I'm not overwhelmed yet, but this is what Malachi Martin was facing. Was he would give out his telephone number and his postal address on live radio, and then next minute you can imagine his voicemail was just rammed with people needing his help. But I do, there's this, from my point of view, it's extremely commercial. People are interested about it out there, and I know Netflix are still interested in the subject matter. So yeah, but who knows? We will definitely see more content around this subject matter, and also around the man. So, but for me, it's made me skeptical in a good way, because obviously I trawled through hours and hours of real recordings of exorcism, listened to hours and hours of audio tapes, and sometimes it's quite difficult not to be dragged into believing everything you hear and everything you see. So I think you just got to question everything that you hear and see in front of you. But I have never had that experience in the room, though. I've never been to one where you felt that experience, which you can't really see and can't really hear. It's just that presence in the room. I've never felt that, and I'm sure if I did, then I would be even more more of a believer in a sense. But no, it's been an incredible journey.
Well, Malachi Martin, I guess that he stated that exorcisms are increasing. Is that something that you have seen through your own research? Yeah,
I think for the Rome chapter was important, because I heard about this course which is run out at the University of Regina, and I just had to speak to the head lecturer, who was also priest, Catholic priest exorcist, who was the right hand man to Gabriel Amorth. So yeah, I needed to speak to him about, obviously you're training hundreds of priests to become exorcists each year, and where are they all going? And his answer was very frank. He could specifically tell me where they were all going to, and it was always areas where it was high concentrations of religion and faith. It was always the complete opposite. For example, Turin, in Italy, I never thought this, but Turin is a hot spot of activity and slightly overwhelmed in that area at the moment. And obviously you've got the Turin Shroud, etc. So there's always that complete opposite of what in the battle, in a sense. And you've got South America, a lot of cartels who are worshipping Satan, etc., and drinking blood and doing all the occult rituals, who believe that by drinking this blood and believing in Satan, they would be they would be able to sort of dodge bullets and not be imprisoned, and obviously you've got Africa, areas of Africa as well with voodoo, etc. So no, they're extremely busy. But what I found fascinating with the course is they actually invite a lot of science practitioners as well, so they get a nice mix of science and priests in the room. So, and obviously I was fortunate to interview Matt Baglio, who wrote The Rite, The Making of a Modern Exorcist. He was probably the first Western journalist allowed into these exorcisms in Rome. Right. And he was standing in the back of the room. So he was like me as well. He was actually in the room, which is not what I've done, but he was even more skeptical as well. He was even more of a skeptic. So he was great to interview as well. And obviously, The Rite became a film with Anthony Hopkins and became quite famous. So and he wrote Argo as well. So which I'm a big fan of that film. So he was great to speak to.
Yeah, The Rite was a pretty decent film. I mean, I think it had nothing to do with the book, but they usually don't, do they?
That's all. Ask Ralph Sarchi about that.
Yeah. Well, Marty, we're almost out of time here, but before I let you go, I want to talk about a little bit of your other projects, other things that you've been working on. What are some of those, and what are you working on next?
So, I class myself more as a storyteller than anything. Storytelling can be in many genres and many areas. So I'm not just a documentary filmmaker. I also have passions in feature film narrative work as well. So at the moment, I'm heavily involved in two projects. One being a narrative horror film. Because I'll be honest with you, give me feature films every time, because that script's already written. The script's been through the ringer, and it's been developed, and it's been, it's there. It's 80 plus pages, and there's a start, middle, and end, I hope. But with documentary, it's just an ongoing. It consistently molds and moves into areas sometimes you're not expecting. So with documentary, it's more of an organic process of writing, and hence why it took me so long to finish it and to make it. But with feature film, it's like I said before, it's very the script's already written, it's there, etc. So that's
laid out for you. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but also, I'm working on a feature documentary about invisible wounds of war in special forces, and it's an area which is very close to my heart. Being an ex-sufferer myself, I'm a former Royal Marine Commando, and my grandfather was in the Special Air Service during World War II, and he was an undiagnosed sufferer of PTSD, and that for me is another passion project which I'm working on at the moment with some UK Special Forces guys at the moment. So it's going to be extremely in-depth, emotional, personal, private journey, which I'm going to be going on at the same time as the Special Forces operators. So that's another passion project which I'm heavily involved in at the moment. So again, I just don't like to pigeonhole myself into one area. So I like to tell as many stories as I can in different sort of formats.
Now, I did see one, I guess, that you're being worked on or has come out, Shaping the Past.
That looked
very interesting.
Yeah, Shaping the Past, unfortunately, wasn't given a broadcast, but it was a project about a woman who had suffered from sexual abuse when she was an athlete, and she became a famous sports correspondent for Sky and now independently. So it was a story about her life, her sort of her case against her coach. But by turning it into a positive, she decided to run around the UK to different soccer stadiums over 7 days. So it was I was very sort of involved in that one as well. And there's also a short film online, which I released online about 2 years ago, which is free to watch. It's called To Lose Control. It's on Vimeo. Yeah. And that's a short film basically about my own life and my journey of how I got to the end of recovery. So that's a film called To Lose Control, which you can watch online for free. So that's about my life and my journey in a sense.
Man, that's something that I would love to talk to you about sometime. Yeah. I mean, that is I've met a lot of people that have had the same issues, and it's a very private illness, if you know what I mean. So a lot of my family and friends had no idea that I was suffering, and it's a very private. I kept it all inside. It's not sometimes what you see in the films where we're not all wife beaters or sure.
fighting in bars and stuff. It's for me, it was a very private illness where I just contained it myself, and there was, for example, the one incident which really made me go out and stop being selfish and get some help was hugging. My daughter was 4 at the time, but hugging her in the kitchen and feeling absolute nothing. Numbness, total numbness to my daughter, who I know I worshipped and adored since the day she was born, and having that numbness, I wouldn't put on any even my greatest enemies. I wouldn't put that on. It was just a horrible feeling, which made me get up and get out there and get the help that I needed. So so
having that realization,
exactly, yeah, exactly, that eureka moment.
And you've also gotten the opportunity to film in the Middle East, which I found interesting. I think you did, it looks like you did a little short film, a little short documentary about Egypt right after the revolution.
Yeah, so during the Arab Spring, I was called in. They were trying to find somebody who was mad enough to go in at the time, and my number was on the list. And being ex-military, and it was normal. It was quite normal to me to be sent into these places. So during the tail end of the revolution, the Arab Spring, I was brought in to do a documentary about what happens next, in a sense, and then from there I went on to do a lot of work in Africa, particularly Sudan. And I went from there into Palestine, which is very, very interesting place. And so they tend to send me to areas which are no one's crazy enough to go into. So it was that for me was a nice time to transition from military to civilian life. That was a nice time and a nice opportunity to actually, although I'm not carrying a weapon, I still had that buzz, which we talk about in my next documentary, No Smoke in the Sky. We talk about that. We basically treat it like an addiction, in a sense. In this new film, we talk about that euphoric sense and that euphoric feeling which you get in combat, which when it isn't in your life anymore leaves a massive void and it breaks you down as a person. So we're treating the film like it's an addiction film, which has never been seen before, which hopefully I'll get out and get on your screens very soon. So very interesting.
Wow, that sounds very interesting, very fascinating. Very, very interesting to be in Palestine too. I mean, that just sounds like a really crazy place to be. And I guess you really see how things, when you're there, you see how things really are.
Yeah, the biggest thing I see is resilience. It's so hard when you're on one side of the fence. When you're in Israel, you get a sense of it's such a delicate beast as well. It's when you're in Palestine, for example, you speak to people and it's their side of the story. And then when you go across to the military checkpoint and you speak to the Israelis, it's their side of the story. And it's like, oh my word, it's so mixed up. And it's been similar to Northern Ireland and, in the 60s, 70s, and, but, Belfast at the moment it's an extremely affluent place at the moment, and it's doing so well. And obviously Game of Thrones is filmed here, and it's just, it's doing so well for itself.
We're big Game of Thrones fans.
Oh, great. But unfortunately, even nowadays, we have small pockets of violence.
Sure.
A lot of communities want to go back to the old days, and unfortunately, that's the news that always makes it worldwide. And I still get messages from my parents saying, "Is everything okay?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's 0.03% of the 0.05% of the population want to go back to violence. Don't listen to what you're seeing on the news. The news just like to sex things up in a sense. So it's So I love this place. Belfast has been great for me, and both raising my family here and also professionally as well. It's been a great place to develop my career as well. So.
Yeah, you don't feel like there's any sense of danger there anymore.
Oh no, no. So it's still. Well, if you go looking for it, you'll find it.
Sure. So, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like any place. Yeah. What are some of your influences as far as both feature filmmaking and documentary filmmaking? Like what people influenced you?
With feature film, I'm a massive fan of Danny Boyle. So train spotting, Sunshine, all those types of films. With documentary, I was totally blown away by Sebastian Junger's work, his slate of work, particularly Restrepo when that came out. I just loved the bonus of that. And Alex Gibney, he's great. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of specify, but
what about Herzog?
Yeah, he's okay. Yeah. He's okay. Yeah. He's okay. He's sometimes it's quite difficult to get through some of his work, but that's no disrespect to him. But no, it's all similar to Sebastian Junger's work. It's raw and it's real and it's on screen, and there's the audience have got a great bullshit radar. They know when things are being faked and sexed up on screen. So as a documentary maker, you just got to keep things as real as you can and just have little sprinkles of sensationalism. But obviously at the end of the day, as long as you know what you're talking about and the question. What the underlying question is, and the same for Hostage. The underlying question throughout the film is, did this man tell the truth, or was he an absolute fantasist? That's the main question.
Yep. And I think you do a good job of exploring it. And where can people see the film?
Hostage to the Devil's out on Netflix, I believe. Well, yep. It's on for 3 more years, so you've got time to watch it, and it's still on iTunes, so you can watch it on iTunes, and I think it may still be on Amazon Prime, I'm not sure, but so the main one being Netflix, but I believe also iTunes and Amazon still have it as well.
Excellent. Well, Marty, thank you so much for coming on the show. Stay on the line for us. We're going to close this out, and guys, we will be back on Conspirinormal.
Tarot is the art of using cards to peek into the mysteries of the world around us. Have you ever wanted to try tarot? To learn more about relationships, work, or finances? Maybe you don't know where to start, or feel self-conscious going into one of those parlors. Try Ask Shuffle Cut, a great way to try tarot over email. Check us out at askshufflecut.wix.com/tarot. That's askshufflecut.wix.com/tarot.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to Conspirinormal. Fascinating interview. I tried to watch the movie this morning. I'm going to have to watch it tonight now after the fact. Just, I didn't know much about this guy. I've, heard about him in previous episodes, and I don't know. Just, I feel like we barely scratched the surface with Marty tonight, and I feel like the documentary, according to you guys, barely scratches the surface of the subject itself. So
sure,
I'm intrigued. I'm very, very intrigued.
Yeah, I think that you will. I think that you'll like it. I mean, if you're definitely into kind of like spooky stuff like that, you will enjoy it. And it has a very, I think, just a very good feel to it as well. I think he does some really cool little techniques. Because not only is like he was saying that he's a feature filmmaker as well, so he brings that kind of together a little bit. There are a little bit of dramatizations, but not so much as like reenactments, if you get what I mean. Like it more like sets the sets the feel, sets the stage.
The pacing and the editing of it and stuff.
Yeah. I was just curious about like when in the interview, just from that, not knowing very much about maybe Malachi Martin himself, what you kind of got out of that, I guess the whole like idea of exorcism in the first place. What do you think about that?
I'm kind of on the fence about it. I mean, I don't believe real strongly in demonic possession to begin with. And I don't believe that there's a huge war between good and evil. I think that people are just all kinds of shades of gray, and we all have a little bit of that in all of us. And to me, demonic possession is more a metaphoric thing, like letting your instincts or letting addictions or letting certain things take control over your moral compass.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it takes a priest to go in and correct something like that.
But there could be though, even if it was just that, even if it was just where you are completely overwhelmed, or maybe your psyche is completely overwhelmed by whatever it is, that whether it's an external force or whether it could be like what you're saying, an internal force, there could be something therapeutic about going through a ritual that basically cleanses you.
Oh, for sure. And, I think the more the person, the possessed individual believes in it, I think the more powerful it's going to be.
Right. And episode 150, when we had Red Pill and Josh and Soraya on the show, we talked about this film because they had sat down and they had watched it. And we talked about some of like the power of belief, whether you can become so wrapped up in what your belief system is that you see nothing else outside of that, and that you don't think of any other factors, even though sometimes you say that you do. I do like how Marty kind of typified it as, from his research, that he talked about how exorcism was much more of a mundane thing than is usually been portrayed, especially by Hollywood, right?
Right.
Because like our first kind of portrayal of an exorcism is obviously The Exorcist. And then everything kind of builds off of that to movies like The Conjuring, The Last Exorcism, which if you've not seen, is an excellent movie. These kind of The Rite, these kind of movies that are out there. So people get in their head that this is how an exorcism is supposed to be. Like it's supposed to be such an extreme sort of thing, but it really isn't in a way. It's more of I guess in a way of cleansing someone's soul, I suppose. And I asked about the Annalise Michelle case because even though that is, in many ways, it's a horrifying case in and of itself. Of here's this girl that apparently had this bright future, but apparently she did have, some people think she had mental problems. Some people think she was possessed, but she just basically wasted away and was like basically like a living skeleton towards the end of her life. And if you listen to those tapes, have you ever heard any of those tapes?
No.
Like you can find stuff like that about it on YouTube. It's utterly horrifying. I mean, she's screeching. I've heard some people say that she spoke in other languages, but Marty said that it was all just in German. So I don't know. I don't know if there really was anything to it. That's The Exorcism of Emily Rose was based off that case. If you've ever seen
Okay,
that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. I mean, basically what happened in that case is what happens in that movie, except they took it from Germany to like middle America somewhere.
Right.
That's a good movie too, in and of itself, because, it's more of a courtroom drama than anything. And so it does kind of feed on this idea that, well, was she or wasn't she? Or was it a actual demon, or was she just messed up? And the faith fed into it. What were your thoughts on kind of like what you heard about Malachi Martin? I mean, what do you think about from just the little that you heard, do you think that he was on to something? Do you think that he was a charlatan? Do you think that he was?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like he took a lot of risks.
Yeah.
To kind of get his beliefs and opinions out there, which, I mean, I don't see why else he would have done that unless he really believed it.
Right.
As far as like the, what was it? The Vatican stuff, the satanic stuff going on and all that. Having really no knowledge of him before this, it's hard to really have much of an opinion on him. Sure. And I think that's what fascinated me most about those. Now I just want to learn more about him and his history.
Yeah. My main, exposure to him was just from hearing maybe like an Art Bell interview or something. And a lot of that stuff you can find on YouTube now. So you can go back and listen to this stuff from like the mid to late 90s. I do want to talk a little bit, delve a little deeper into some of his ideas. This is from a website that I think is probably a little bit more biased on the Catholic side, but we'll go ahead and read some of it anyway. Talking about some of like the third secret of Fatima and this whole idea of the Black Mass in the Vatican, what this was. I mean, you got to admit, this is really like juicy stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
This is like, you can sink your teeth into this. This is from These Last Days News. Okay. Concurrent satanic rites reportedly took place in the U.S. and St. Paul's Chapel in the Vatican on June 29th, 1963, barely a week after the election of Paul VI. Father Malachi Martin affirmed Satanism has been practiced in the Vatican. Father Malachi Martin's accusations. In the Fatima Crusader article, Malachi Martin, a scholar, Vatican insider, and best-selling author, said anybody who is acquainted with the state of affairs in the Vatican in the last 35 years is well aware that the Prince of Darkness has had and still has his surrogates in the court of St. Peter in Rome. From 1958 until 1964, Jesuit priest Malachi Martin served in Rome, where he was a close associate of and carried out many sensitive missions for the renowned Jesuit Cardinal Augustin Bay and the Pope. Released afterwards from his vows of poverty and obedience at his own request, but still a priest, he ultimately moved to New York and became a best-selling writer of fiction and nonfiction. One of the things in the movie and the documentary he talks about is, he was released from his vows of poverty so he could make a living, and his obedience, which was actually his obedience to the Jesuit order, but he was not released from his vows of chastity, which if he slept with the other dude's wife, then he kind of broke that vow. But anyway.
Right.
Martin first made reference to a diabolic rite held in Rome in his 1990 nonfiction bestseller about geopolitics and the Vatican, The Keys of This Blood, in which he wrote, most frighteningly for Pope John Paul II, he had come up against the irremovable presence of a malign strength in his own Vatican and certain bishops' chanceries. It was what knowledgeable churchmen called the superforce. Rumors always difficult to verify, tied its installation to the beginning of Pope Paul VI's reign in 1963. Indeed, Paul had alluded somberly to the smoke of Satan which has entered the sanctuary, an oblique reference to an enthronement ceremony by Satanists in the Vatican. Besides, the incidence of satanic pedophilia, rites, and practices was already documented among certain bishops and priests, as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and South Carolina in the United States. The cultic acts of satanic pedophilia are considered by professionals to be the culmination of the fallen archangel's rites, which, by the way, specifically Charleston, South Carolina, which is where, as I mentioned before, Scottish Rite was founded by, with the guy, on the phallic throne, our friend on the phallic throne, whose name just escaped me, by the way, Albert Pike. And, incidentally, Charleston falls on the 33rd degree of latitude. The These allegations have largely gone unnoticed, possibly because he was so crafty in his descriptions that he might even have been referring to the coronation of Pope Paul VI. But he revealed much more about this alleged ritual in one of his last books, Windswept House, a Vatican novel, which Marty talked about. He wants to adapt into a film. In this story, he vividly described a ceremony called the enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer. Supposedly held in St. Paul's Chapel in the Vatican, but linked with concurrent satanic rites here in the U.S. on June 29th, 1963, barely a week after the election of Paul VI. In the novel, before he dies, the Pope leaves a secret account of the situation on his desk for the next occupant of the throne of Peter, a thinly disguised John Paul II. According to the New American, Martin confirmed that the ceremony did indeed occur as he had described. "Oh yes, it is true, very much so," the magazine reported. He said, "The only way I could put that down into print is in novelistic form." Martin's accusation of a satanic ritual at the Vatican was also confirmed by John Loeffler, head of the Still on Still radio show. Mr. Loeffler personally asked Father Malachi Martin, who had been a regular guest on his show, about the reported dedication to Satan within the Vatican. "You know," Malachi confirmed, "the first part of his book, Windswept House, has confirmed the dedication to the Vatican to Satan in a secret ceremony that occurred unknown even to the Pope at that time, and he managed to pick up. And I did ask him, was this true? Did it happen? And he, Father Martin, said, yes, it did." Father Malachi Martin also said members of the clergy are becoming aware of the situation. An archbishop several years ago has accused high members of the hierarchy in Rome of practicing Satanism. The Italian newspaper Il Tempo and other major daily papers reported this stunning news. Okay. So that's basically the whole idea of the Black Mass. Apparently there was this idea that they had this Black Mass in the Vatican, and they had another Black Mass in Charleston, South Carolina, where somebody did, where they phoned it in so they could listen to each other. I don't know exactly what that means, but this is interesting. And this is a conspiracy that we haven't really gotten into on the show. The murder of Pope John Paul I. Have you ever seen Godfather Part 3?
It's been a long time.
Okay. The Blessed Virgin Mary's apparition in Bayside, New York, stating that Satan has entered into the highest realms of the hierarchy in Rome, would also explain some very dark secrets surrounding the death of Pope John Paul I, who mysteriously died of a heart attack, in quotation marks, slightly over a month after election. Regarding the alleged heart attack, his niece affirmed, "It's in my family. Almost no one believes it was a heart attack that killed my uncle. He never had heart trouble or any illness of that kind." And Pope John Paul I's brother. John Paul's brother Eduardo in Australia on a trade mission reported that the Pope had been given a clean bill of health after a medical examination 3 weeks ago. He was frail in health as an infant and as a young priest, but there were no reports of heart trouble. From Time magazine, in an early age, so untimely a death may have stirred deep suspicions. If this were the time of the Borgias, said a young teacher in Rome, there'd be talk that John Paul was poisoned. But the Vatican replied that such allegations were irresponsible. The fact is, Our Lady's message at, let's see. I'm not going to read this. But by the way, you know how long Pope John Paul I, how many days his reign as Pope was?
63.
No.
200.
33.
Oh.
33. There it is again. Please note that a 1975 ruling from the Vatican ordered that no autopsy could be performed on a pope. How convenient. What does the Vatican have to fear from an autopsy? Not just Our Lady's message points to foul play. There is a best-selling book by David Yallop that also alleges that Pope John Paul I was murdered in God's name, an investigation into the murder of Pope John Paul I. Okay, so the reason I brought up Godfather Part 3 is that's basically part of the plot of Godfather Part 3 about Pope John Paul I being murdered, poisoned in his bed. The theory is that I don't know what it's got to do with the dark satanic mass, but it probably has to do with the fact that Pope John Paul I was going to actively look into the actions of the Vatican Bank which were not too good, shall we say. There was a lot of people skimming off and making a lot of money off the Vatican Bank. And there was also an involvement by this Masonic group in Italy called Propaganda Duo, which is also called P2. And it was apparently involved with the Vatican Bank. And under Paul VI, these guys had free reign to do whatever they wanted. Paul VI dies. They bring in this new Pope, Pope John Paul I, who in some ways is kind of like Pope Francis now. You know, wanted to really come in and change things, going to look into the corruption that was in the Vatican. And then 33 days later, he's found dead of a heart attack. And of course, there's no autopsy available for him because you cannot.
So they just guessed that it was a heart attack?
Well, I suppose.
I mean, I don't know
that's
how
what they told the world, that he had a heart attack in his sleep.
How can you confirm that though without an autopsy?
Right, exactly. That's why it's very strange. I mean, granted, he was an older man, but a lot of people in the family, his own family, thought it was strange that he would have died of a quote unquote heart attack.
Yeah, and that kind of timing is just bizarre too. And you know, I watch a lot of those. Alyssa watches a lot of those crime documentary shows, and it's always either a crime of passion or a money thing. And if he was, rocking the boat and getting in the way of a lot of people making a lot of money, I could easily see that being a good motive.
Right. And a couple of years later, this happened in 1978. So I think about 2-3 years later, there was a guy named Roberto Calvi, who was a member of P2 and also an official in the Vatican Bank. And he was about to go public with some of his stuff, and they found him hanging off a bridge in the middle of London, like literally hanging there. And so Godfather Part 3 kind of plays on all this whole conspiracy, because in the movie, Michael Corleone is trying to finally go legit, right? After 20 years of being this mafia guy. And he's trying to bring the family business into legitimacy and selling off the Corleone crime family holdings and trying to invest it in some kind of like trading company that is owned by the Vatican Bank. Well, he ends up just getting involved with even deeper criminals that have been around for 500 years, right? And that are involved with the Vatican Bank, and eventually, as a way to get back at him, they kill the Pope in the movie, because the Pope is this guy that the cardinal that he confesses his sins to at one point in the film, and there is actually a scene where they kill Corleone's guys, kill a banker, and hang him off a bridge. Okay. So that's the Roberto Calvi character. However, in real life, that happened about 3 years after. That's a whole like can of worms, like the P2. I mean, you talking, those guys are like classic mafia, Freemasonic ideas, probably roots in like the old criminal history in Italy. Okay. That stuff goes and runs deep there. And that was a huge thing in like the early 80s, because people really speculated that's what happened. And, Pope John Paul II was elected. And then 3 years later, about a year after he was elected, he was shot by this Turkish guy. And some people think that there's something that has to do with that. And so that's where like the third secret of Fatima comes in, right? Is that they say that the third secret is that that a pope would be killed or assaulted. This is from, I'll go over this and we'll go over to some other things, but this is from the Book of Knowledge. in Wikipedia. Let's give what the 3 secrets are. The first secret, because this is the 3 children that saw the lady in Fatima in Portugal,
right,
in 1917. We talk about this in a Patreon only. So you gotta be a Patreon, a little plug there to hear this with Joshua Cutchin. Those are all posted on our Patreon page, but you gotta pay $4 a month to hear it. Hint, hint. And then there was the other things about the miracle of the sun that I mentioned, which a lot of people believe is a UFO event. There are some people out there who believe that is what that was. Guys like Jacques Vallée talk about that. But the first secret that the lady said to the 3 children, and the one that survived, that lived to adulthood into old age, was Lucia. The first secret was a vision of hell. Okay. The second secret was a statement that World War I would end, along with a prediction of another war during the reign of Pope Pius XI. Should men continue offending God, and should Russia not convert? The second half requests that Russia be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. There's all kinds of stuff about Russia in these prophecies, which is strange because it's 1917, and that was the year of the revolution. And this happened in July, so it was a few months before even the Bolshevik Revolution. You look perplexed there, Rob.
Well, I was just trying to, because this is all from Portugal, correct?
Right. Yeah, it's Portugal.
What, was there anything significant going on tying Russia to the region, or
well, World War I was happening at that time, and Portugal technically was involved with the Allies in World War I, so they were technically allies of Russia. That's the only thing that I could see.
I was just thinking, would Russia have been on the people's mind anyways, or is it just really bizarre?
Probably it may have been because of the fact that Russia was experiencing a revolution. I mean, the Tsar had been, we talked about some of this last week. The Tsar had been toppled in March of 1917, and this is July of 1917. So I'm sure it was on people's minds, a lot of people's minds, especially on the Allied side, whether Russia was going to stay in the war. Right. So I could see that. And then, but it's interesting that kind of, what happens under communism, and Russia is not a Catholic country. It's a Russian Orthodox country. So I don't know why that there would be the concern of the Blessed Virgin Mary for Russia, unless she just really had a heart for him or something. But what that means, I don't know. But, what happens after though is that the Bolshevik Revolution happens and Russia becomes an atheistic society and begins to persecute the church. So there is that. This is the third secret. Okay. Which was not revealed supposedly until the 60s, I think. Written on one sheet of paper, the text, this is what Lucia wrote, that was the third secret of Our Lady of Fatima. The text of the third secret released by the Vatican is handwritten on 4 sheets of paper. Father Joaquin Alonso, official Fatima archivist for 16 years, reports in his book that Lucy tells us she wrote it on a sheet of paper. In a taped interview, Charles Fiore quoted Malachi Martin as saying the following regarding the text of the third secret. I cooled my heels in the corridor outside the Holy Father's apartments while my boss, Cardinal Bay, was inside debating with the Holy Father and with a group of other bishops and priests and 2 young Portuguese seminarians who translated the letter, a single page written in Portuguese for all those in the room. Written in the form of a letter, another reason why critics argue the full third secret has not been released is because of indications that the third secret was written in the form of a signed letter to the bishop of the area, and the text of the third secret released by the Vatican is not written in the form of a letter. Lucia was interviewed by Father Yonkin on February 3rd, 1946. When Father Yonkin asked Lucia when the time would arrive for the third secret, Lucia responded, "I communicated the third part in a letter to the Bishop of Liera." Also, Canon Galamba, an advisor to the Bishop of Liera, is quoted as saying, when the bishop refused to open the letter, Lucy made him promise that it would definitely be open and read to the word either at her death or in 1960, whichever came first. So it was read in 1960, which is around the same time as the Second Vatican Council that we talked about. Contains words attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary. The text of the third secret released by the Vatican contains no words attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So she asserts that the third secret likely begins with the words, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved," etc. Words with Lucia included in her fourth memoir, which were not included only as a footnote to the text released by the Vatican. So that's somebody doubting the veracity of it, possibly. And then another one is contains information about the apocalypse, apostasy, satanic infiltration of the church. This is probably where Malachi Martin would come down on this. In an interview published in the November 11th, 1984 edition of Jesus Magazine. Do you know there's a Jesus Magazine? Cardinal Ratzinger was the one who became Benedict XVI, by the way, was asked whether he had read the text of the third secret and why it had not been revealed. Ratzinger acknowledged that he had read the third secret and stated in part that the third secret involves the importance of the noviciate and dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian and therefore the life of the world. Ratzinger also commented that if it is not made public, at least for the time being, it is ordered to prevent religious prophecy from being mistaken for a quest for the sensational. Also, a news article quoted former Philippine ambassador to the Vatican, Howard D., as saying that Cardinal Ratzinger had personally confirmed to him that the messages of Akita and Fatima are essentially the same. This must be another appearance. Marian apparition. The Akita prophecy in part it contains the following: the work of the devil will infiltrate even the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops, churches and altars sacked. On May 13th, 2000, Cardinal Soldano announced that the third secret would be released, during which he implied the secret was about the persecutions of Christians in the 20th century that culminated in the failed assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II on 13th May 1981. In a syndicated radio broadcast, Malachi Martin stated that the third secret doesn't make any sense unless we accept that there will be or that there is in progress a wholesale apostasy amongst clerics and laity in the Catholic Church. Okay. So that's the convoluted story of the third secret of Our Lady of Fatima. Which another thing I found interesting about Malachi Martin was that he accepted the validity of the apparition at Fatima, which is accepted by the Catholic Church, but did not accept the apparition of Medjugorje, which is in Croatia, that has gone back, I think either Croatia or Bosnia, but has gone back and forth as being whether it's real or not, and the Catholic Church still has not accepted it. I just find it funny that he accepted that, and not being one that did not accept the Vatican II Council, he would still not accept something that the Church did not accept. Does that make any sense? What I'm saying? Yeah, no, I know. Well, maybe he doesn't accept it for the same reasons that they don't. It might not be based on their opinion at all. Right. I don't know what that could be because I don't know anything about it. But so that's the convoluted history of the. If there's anybody out there in the audience that is Catholic and wants to comment on this, please feel free to send us an email because I'm confused. Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm getting out of this basically is the third secret was by the author of the said secret, or the messenger, however you want to put it. Yeah. It's an apocalyptic thing tied to Satanism in the church. And they wanted it to be either released in 1960 or upon their death. Were they still alive? I think I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. In 1960? Because I was just wondering if, when they came out and shared this, if she disputed it at all. Well, the controversy is that, they had, that the Vatican said that it was something else about Russia and an attack on the Pope.
And she had all these allusions to various things that were supposed to be included that were not in their official.
Yeah. She died in 2005, by the way. So she did not pass away. She was still alive in 1960.
But she never disputed it that we know of.
Apparently, as far as I know. But then some people have said, and Malachi Martin was one of them, said that, no, that's not what the third secret was. The third secret was actually about the apocalypse, about a coming war. And the Vatican is basically trying to sanitize that by saying it's something that has already happened. In other words, it was about an attack on John Paul I, on a pope, which was fulfilled by John Paul I being the second assassinated.
I see.
So
sort of, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll turn to the world of our more crazy stuff, our crazy politics. It's been quite a week for old Donald. Have you kept up with any of that? Like what's happened this week with,
no, I'm hiding from all that stuff
Trump?
At this point. I can't change it. The stone's rolling downhill.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm going to stay out of its way.
This is what happened this week. Two things. Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor, who by the time that I had read that article and we had that show up, had already quit as National Security Advisor because he was talking, information came out that he was talking to the Russian ambassador. And there was a lot of discussion about whether that the word sanctions was bandied about. In other words, of trying to lift sanctions against Russia, specifically the sanctions that happened back in December that Obama put on Russia because of the quote unquote proof that there was hacking that happened. So that's the sanctions. Apparently Flynn had lied to Mike Pence about something and Trump decided to just go ahead and get his resignation. The second thing, though not as major, was Pusdar, the labor secretary, the one that had been the CEO of both Carl's Jr. and Hardee's.
Right.
The fast food guy that apparently would have so much sympathy for the common American working man. Could not get enough votes to even be confirmed. So that means even Republicans in the Senate said, no, we will not support this guy. There was a press conference on Thursday that I watched almost the entire thing that Trump gave. And it was basically, and I thought some of the things that he said were good and some of the things that he said were bad. I'm pretty mixed on that. I don't think it's all bad or all good, but he basically, what it came down to was just him having a lot of animosity with the mainstream media, like CNN especially, calling people fake news. You're fake news. You're very fake news. Then putting out a tweet the next day that said the mainstream media are the enemy of the people. Okay. Trump did say something very interesting that, he's gone, that he basically accused the CIA of, or some intelligence agency of leaking the information about Flynn. So then he said that he had to do what he had to do. So he basically blamed them for leaking it. I talked about the deep state. We talked about that last time and what that meant. And man, we are in between a rock and a hard place, brother. What we have got going on right now is Trump saying that he's going to go after the intelligence community, restructure it the way he wants it, and the intelligence community basically pushing back.
Well, yeah, because he wants to be in absolute control, and that's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
There's various things that are supposed to be set in place to keep our president in check. And he's attacking that. Like,
right.
Everybody should have a problem with this. Democrat, Republican, whether you watch Fox News or whether, you read some crazy left-wing magazine, it doesn't matter. This is the foundations of our country are put together to keep powers in check.
And I agree with you, but I don't know if necessarily the intelligence agencies are the ones that need to do it, because
but attacking them for
just out of control as he is.
Absolutely. But him attacking them for releasing information that is pretty valid and important and keeping something horrible from happening, they shouldn't be criticized for that either.
Yeah. Well, I have a clip here. Yes, we have a clip, and this is rather long. It's about 5 minutes long. This is Glenn Greenwald. Okay. Hardly a Trump supporter. Glenn Greenwald is a journalist. I forget what newspaper that he wrote for, but he was one of the big ones that broke the Edward Snowden story. Remember Edward Snowden, the guy who did the big leak about how the major tech companies were conspiring with the government and the intelligence agencies to spy on us?
Yes.
Basically. He was one of the people that supported Snowden, released a lot of this information. Greenwald lives now in Brazil, apparently with his boyfriend, but he lives in Brazil because I don't think he really wants to come back to the United States, because I think he's on the shit list, whether it be for Obama or for Trump. So this is hardly someone that supports Donald Trump. And this is actually a clip from Democracy Now!, which is about one of the most left-wing organizations that you can possibly get. So let's play this clip and just kind of let this sink in. I was amazed to hear him say this. But this goes right into what we've been talking about with the deep state, and how now the phrase deep state has become about as much as a meme as Cash Me Outside. Yeah, I threw that in.
The deep state, although there's no precise or scientific definition, generally refers to the agencies in Washington that are permanent power factions. They stay and exercise power even as presidents who are elected come and go. They typically exercise their power in secret, in the dark, and so they're barely subject to democratic accountability if they're subject to it at all. It's agencies like the CIA, the NSA, and the other intelligence agencies that are essentially designed to disseminate disinformation and deceit and propaganda, and have a long history of doing not only that, but also have a long history of the world's worst war crimes, atrocities, and death squads. This is who not just people like Bill Kristol, but lots of Democrats are placing their faith in, are trying to empower, are cheering for, as they exert power separate and apart from, in fact, in opposition to the political officials to whom they're supposed to be subordinate. And this is not just about Russia. You go all the way back to the campaign, and what you saw was that leading members of the intelligence community, including Mike Morrell, who was the acting CIA chief under President Obama, and Michael Hayden, who ran both the CIA and the NSA under George W. Bush, were very outspoken supporters of Hillary Clinton. In fact, Michael Morrell went to the New York Times and Michael Hayden went to the Washington Post during the campaign to praise Hillary Clinton and to say that Donald Trump had become a recruit of Russia. The CIA and the intelligence community were vehemently in support of Clinton and vehemently opposed to Trump from the beginning. And the reason was because they liked Hillary Clinton's policies better than they liked Donald Trump's. One of the main priorities of the CIA for the last 5 years has been a proxy war in Syria designed to achieve regime change with the Assad regime. Hillary Clinton was not only for that, she was critical of Obama for not allowing it to go further and wanted to impose a no-fly zone in Syria and confront the Russians. Donald Trump took exactly the opposite view. He said, we shouldn't care who rules Syria. We should allow the Russians and even help the Russians kill ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other people in Syria. So Trump's agenda that he ran on was completely antithetical to what the CIA wanted. Clinton's was exactly what the CIA wanted, and so they were behind her. And so they've been trying to undermine Trump for many months throughout the election, and now that he won, they are not just undermining him with the leaks, but actively subverting him. There's claims that they're withholding information from him on the grounds that they don't think he should have it and can be trusted with it. They are empowering themselves to enact policy. Now, I happen to think that the Trump presidency is extremely dangerous. You just listed off in your newscast that led the show many reasons. They want to dismantle the environment. They want to eliminate the safety net. They want to empower billionaires. They want to enact bigoted policies against Muslims and immigrants and so many others. And it is important to resist them. And there are lots of really great ways to resist them, such as getting courts to restrain them, citizen activism, and most important of all, having the Democratic Party engage in self-critique to ask itself how it can be a more effective political force in the United States after it has collapsed on all levels. That isn't what this resistance is now doing. What they're doing instead is trying to take maybe the only faction worse than Donald Trump, which is the deep state, the CIA, with its histories of atrocities, and say they ought to almost engage in like a soft coup where they take the elected president and prevent him from enacting his policies. And I think it is extremely dangerous to do that. Even if you're somebody who believes that both the CIA and the deep state on the one hand and the Trump presidency on the other are extremely dangerous, as I do, there's a huge difference between the two, which is that Trump was democratically elected and is subject to democratic controls, as these courts just demonstrated, and as the media is showing, as citizens are proving. But on the other hand, the CIA was elected by nobody. They're barely subject to democratic controls at all. And so to urge that the CIA and the intelligence community empower itself to undermine the elected branches of government is insanity. That is a prescription for destroying democracy overnight in the name of saving it. And yet that's what so many, not just neocons, but the neocons' allies in the Democratic Party are now urging and cheering. And it's incredibly warped and dangerous to watch them do that.
Okay, so
Can I revamp my earlier statement?
Yeah.
That's
frightening.
That is very frightening. And I see what you mean now.
Uh-huh.
They're, the intelligence community is a very, very unchecked environment, like he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're probably right. They should stay out of all of it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, I would disagree with one thing that he said, that they think that they're trying to, they're undermining democracy, thinking that they're trying to save it. They're not trying to save democracy. They're just trying to save themselves. They don't really care about how bad Trump is going to be for democracy. They care about how bad Trump is going to be for the intelligence community, for CIA, for NSA, FBI, whatever they are. And I'm more, just the way that I am, from my studies about the CIA and all the bad shit that they have done. It would not surprise me that it would be the CIA. Back in the, back during the campaign, Michael Hayden was on Bill Maher, and Michael Hayden, I believe he was in the NSA, but he's definitely a CIA director. And, this guy, he's to me, this guy scares me. He's a former general, about as military as you can get, and then about as intelligence community as you can get, and as about as neoconservative as you can get. He was one of Bush's apparatchiks back when Bush was in power. And, he just goes on there and says, like, yeah, if Trump does anything, we're going to try to push back. And basically almost saying that, there'd be a case of a military coup d'etat. That bad almost. The other night, I was watching Bill Maher again, cause I do watch that show. I enjoy watching it. And cause it makes me think. And, they were talking about with this one guy that, started off in naval intelligence and works for the NSA, I believe. And he was talking about how about Trump and about how the intelligence agency is against him and these leaks that are coming out, and Bill Maher basically being on the liberal side of the equation is saying things like, well, you know, if he's dangerous, then I support what the CIA is doing. I support what they're doing. I'm sitting there, I'm watching this like, this is unbelievable. Like, I can't believe that I'm hearing this. Yeah, I don't support Trump, but it's like, you know, I can't really sit there and support the CIA and what they're doing and say that they're the heroes in this situation. I just can't, because they're not. They're not looking out for us. They're looking out for themselves. They're looking out for what's going to happen. And the same, you know, if you believe whatever you believe about Kennedy, you know, if the CIA or a faction in the CIA pulled off the Kennedy assassination, they did it because he was threatening them specifically. And I don't really want to get into that whole history, because that'll give you like another 3 hours. But, and then Bill Maher says something about, well, you know, Kennedy might have been, you know, we don't know what happened. He, you know, he was sleeping with these, he used another word, but he said he was sleeping with, East German spies, and like that could have been the reason they had to get rid of him. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? The bad thing about this is that this kind of action just makes all the Trump supporters love him even more, because they think that he is like JFK, and he's not. In no way is he like JFK. He's about the opposite as you can get. But people think, oh, he's standing up to the establishment. And so they take this, and then they take other things that he says, like the press is the enemy of the people. This is why I'm saying we are in a rock and a hard place. This is almost just like, how do you want your fascism, medium or well done? I mean, this is honestly where we are. And then you have the left that's in the equation that would just, you know, a lot of them don't really care about democracy either. So this is what I was talking about when we, you know, apparently this is the evil coming out, lurking in the mud.
Yep. Oh,
But remember, we talk about rainbows and Skittles on this show.
Well, this is why, like, since the election began, the whole election process, that's just where I've been standing. It's like, you know, it's not the lesser of two evils anymore. It's just which regime do you want in place?
Yeah.
You know?
And now apparently, I guess Hillary's not around anymore. So now, do you want the intelligence community to run everything, or do you want Trump? Boy, that's a good choice. Man, I voted for the pothead, man. I voted for Gary Johnson. Okay. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, how are we doing on time?
We're good, sir.
Okay. Well, one more thing I kind of want to go through. I thought this would be interesting. By the way, I want to read this first. This is from at Real Donald J. Trump. The real scandal here is that classified information is illegally given out by intelligence like candy. Very un-American. Yeah. Yep. Next week, we're going to have on William Ramsey. We're going to talk about Aleister Crowley, but more like Aleister Crowley, the people that he influenced. And I thought this would be interesting, kind of a teaser for next time, which is actually tonight for us. But thought this was interesting. Two of the greatest, I don't know if I'll read this whole thing, but two of the greatest comic book writers have been in an occult war for 25 years. Two of the world's greatest comic book writers are wizards. No, seriously. Their work has not only changed comics forever, they've spilled over into literature and especially film. A lot of the movies you loved and even more of the movie plots you loved were influenced by these two guys. So even if you never actually heard of Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, you know their work. Both men are British. Both are only a few years apart in age. Both present themselves as rebels of a sort. Both are passionately dedicated to a personal practice of the occult, and their occult writing has been taken seriously and influenced the scene. But here's the kicker. Moore and Morrison freaking despise each other. So much so that it's actually bled into their work. Some of the greatest comics of the last 25 years have been a direct product of Moore and Morrison's wizard fight. First, some background. Both men started out writing comics in the 1970s and became famous in the 1980s. Internationally, Moore became famous a few years earlier than Morrison. Alan Moore is probably best famous for V for Vendetta, From Hell, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and a little miniseries called Watchmen that changed comics forever. You ever read Watchmen?
No, I haven't.
Oh, very well worth it. Morrison wrote Animal Man and Doom Patrol and The Invisibles. He was the driving force behind the Vertigo line of DC Comics, which focused on weird fiction with occult horror overtones, which had a huge influence on subsequent movies and TV. His work was groundbreaking, but he was also responsible for incredibly significant work on mainstream comics like the X-Men, the Justice League, Superman, and Batman, radically renovating each of these titles and producing some of their most memorable stories of recent years. Moore did mainstream superhero comics too. In the 1980s, his writing on Green Lantern had a significant influence on that character. He turned Swamp Thing from a failing monster comic into a major character, which I have all those, by the way. I used to collect Swamp Thing comic books. I have all of the Alan Moore run. Okay. Nice. Which is, I mean, that's how I first came aware of Alan Moore when I was like 7. And like, it was horror comics. And like, my parents took it away from me at one point. Sorry, really geeking out. Invented John Constantine, wrote the Killing Joke for Batman and a couple of Superman stories that were extremely memorable. But he had a falling out with DC Comics over royalties for Watchmen and in opposition to a plan to put rating systems in their comics. After that, he quit working for the big mainstream comic companies and has never looked back. By the early 90s, it was already obvious Moore had issues with Morrison. He claimed to have helped give Morrison a leg up in his career. Morrison later pointed out he was making comics to much less famous ones before Moore had become known at all, and that Morrison in return just ripped off all of Moore's work. Morrison, on the other hand, claimed that Moore's own work was derivative of a 1977 novel called Superfolks, and that Watchmen was not as great as everyone thought, and that Moore wants to take credit for everything great in comics while slagging anyone he sees as competition. Moore has continued to insinuate throughout the years that Morrison has kept ripping off his ideas, once notably saying, "I've read Morrison's work twice, first when I wrote it, then when he wrote it." Snarky. Even the question of which one of them is the more occult comic book guy has been a bone of contention. Moore's coming out as a magician was better known and got way more press, and he did that in 1993. On the other hand, Morrison was talking publicly about being involved in chaos magic. For the uninitiated, that's with a K. A few years earlier than that, and Morrison has claimed that Moore only decided to come out because Morrison was already public about it. It's not as if either one of them were really secretive about it. Moore's magical ideas were already mostly evident in his early work, and Morrison's pre-1993 work was already highly esoteric. Moore's V for Vendetta openly espoused Gnostic concepts and Aleister Crowley's magical philosophy. Mr. Crowley.
Dun, dun, dun.
Magically, the two believe in very different things. Neither of them are exactly orthodox, but Moore is a more traditionalist kind of wizard. He's an admirer of Aleister Crowley's Thelemic magic and the philosophy in his Book of the Law. He appreciates the value of magic as a kind of art form and in turn considers art to be a kind of magic. Grant Morrison is from the school of chaos magic, who practice magic that is less worried about rules and ritual and more about trying to get things done. Magic can be done from just about anything as long as you have the right intention. Chaos magicians tend to like mixing up elements from a whole variety of different cultures and history to reinvent it all to fit whatever they're in the mood for and have no problem with doing magic for personal gain or to change the world rather than just for human transcendence. Moore's very loud statement of declaring himself a magician in public may just have been a factor in motivating Morrison to go whole hog with the occult comic book thing when he started on The Invisibles in 1994. The Invisibles is a 1,500-page, 59-issue masterpiece of occult literature. Written in comic book form, its winding plotline tells a tells a single long story with various subplots about a group of occult rebels using magic to try to liberate mankind, opposed by a cabal of black magicians in positions of power and authority trying to use sorcery to control and oppress humanity. It is, simply put, one of the greatest comic series of all time. According to Morrison, if you want to take him at his word and not just assume it's a chaos magician metaphor, he was told parts of the story by space aliens when he was abducted by them in Kathmandu. Okay. The entire comic was intentionally designed to function as a kind of spell meant to create powerful changes in consciousness in whoever reads it. It also had weird effects on Morrison's own life. His character, King Mob, was meant to be based on Morrison's ideal version of himself as an occult rebel hero. Morrison started to find out that when he wrote bad things happening to King Mob, bad things happened to himself. When King Mob nearly died from magical bacteria in one of the comic's issues, Morrison himself caught a life-threatening infection. Later, King Mob was shot and almost killed, and Morrison himself had to be hospitalized for blood poisoning. After that, Morrison started writing King Mob as having great things happening to him, and Morrison started to have unexpected fame and fortune of his own. That's interesting. While The Invisibles hasn't got its own movie or TV series yet, it's probably too weird and too hard to make. It was enormously influential on a ton of sci-fi and fantasy writers, as well as filmmakers. In particular, the creators of The Matrix were hugely influenced by The Invisibles. So here's where we get to the part that most articles on the Moore Morrison feud have missed. I'm a comics reader, but probably not an expert enough to really detail the history of quality of work other than at the fan level. But I am an expert of occultism, and I can say this. The war between Moore and Morrison isn't just a writer's fight. It is a wizard's feud. It is two very different views on magic, using comics as a medium to fire salvos at each other. A few years after Morrison started on The Invisibles, Alan Moore came out with Promethea, a 32-issue comic about a young woman who becomes the latest host for the spirit of an ancient, super powerful demigoddess of the imagination. Incarnating in the modern world, she takes on the role of a Wonder Woman-style superheroine, which I have read Promethea in its entirety. Heather let me borrow it. And it is basically Moore's occult philosophy.
Huh.
Okay. Very, very much borrowed from Crowley. Like The Invisibles, Promethea is full of occult symbolism and esoteric philosophical ideas. It's lavishly beautiful and brilliantly written. Just as The Invisibles serve as a showcase for Morrison's own ideas about chaos magic, Buddhism, conspiracy theories, psychedelia, UFO fanaticism, esoteric psychology, punk politics, and apocalypticism, Promethea becomes a showcase for Moore's ideas about magic, Thelema, the Kabbalah, Gnosticism, art as magic, imagination as reality, transcending the shallowness of the modern world, and apocalypticism. Yes, both comics end with the end of the world, but the way these end up is very different from each other and reflect the different views of the two magicians. In The Invisibles, the apocalypse is a humanity transcending singularity. In Promethea, it is a divine union which makes us all more totally human than ever. This difference, like almost all the content in both comics, serves to highlight how Moore and Morrison have very different ideas about occult philosophy. Morrison on magic. Everyone does magic all the time in different ways. Life plus significance equals magic. And Moore on magic. You have to be very careful what you say, because if you suddenly declare yourself to be a magician without any knowledge of what that entails, then you are likely to wake up and to discover that is exactly what you are. I could have picked some other quote from Moore, like his manifesto about how magic should be stripped of its nostalgia or its introverted edginess and be treated as an expression of art, and how learning how to use words is what magic is all about, that you cast a spell in the same sense as spelling a word. But the quote above in some ways seems more appropriate. Morrison wants to be precise and coherent, and he wants to present an image of himself in everything he does. He's a kind of preacher for magic. Moore doesn't give a crap what you think of him, and he just wants to drop hints of wisdom at you, and then you need to figure the rest out yourself. Moore seemed to be mocking Morrison's style of chaos magic in Promethea, basically calling it wankery. In one scene in the comic, Moore has a character point out that in the 1920s, ritual magic was all about turbans, tuxedos, and tarts and tiaras, but now modern chaos magic is all about sigils, stubble, and self-abuse. In response, Morrison calls Moore's Promethea elitist. He seems to want magic to be both accessible to everyone and revolutionary at the same time. As a wizard myself, who is this guy? I'd say that both comics are absolute masterpieces of modern occult literature. Promethea probably includes the greatest explanation ever made of the Tree of Life, the roadmap of traditional Western magic. It's glorious. The Invisibles is probably the most complete compendium of occult ideas in the modern age. That's how they're different. Promethea shows you magic, teaches you why it's important, and invites you to make your own humanity magical. The Invisibles doesn't give you a choice. Just reading it changes you. It blows your mind like it was a supernatural drug. It's not an instruction. It's an experience. But it's too easy to try to write the conflict off by painting Moore as some kind of grumpy old traditionalist and Morrison as a bold in-your-face counterculture rebel. Remember, it was Moore who argued his way out of mainstream comics forever. On the other hand, Morrison plays the rebel, but has become an icon of mainstream comics, though anyone reasonable would agree he's transformed that mainstream and helped enormously to raise the quality of mainstream comic writing. Okay, and then he goes on to talk about Watchmen and another one that Moore did. Yeah, I thought that was very, very interesting and kind of sets up for next week, talking about some of the people that influenced by Aleister Crowley. So, yeah.
How do you become a wizard? Is it like being a producer? I
don't know. I think we need to ask Aaron David.
You just got to say you're a wizard.
Aaron David's a wizard.
I believe it.
I'm pretty sure. He's got like walking sticks and stuff. Randall Carlson's a wizard. I'm pretty sure.
But he looks the part.
He definitely looks the part. I mean, you're looking the part yourself these days. You got the long hair. You got the robe. You got the beard.
I'm working on it. The beard is getting slowly more gray. Every time my daughter says the word boyfriend, it gets spreads it a little bit to one side or the other.
And that's two daughters, by the way. You're like, no.
Yeah, I figure I only have a few months left.
No, don't die on me.
No, just till I'm all silver.
Man. Oh, okay. Okay. Until you begin to look more like Gandalf?
Yes.
Do you want to have a wizard battle in here sometime?
Absolutely.
We get Aaron in the studio and have a wizard off.
A wizard duel.
All right, guys. I think where are we at? About 2 hours now?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to close the show here. Join us next week, guys. We're going to have William Ramsey back. We had him on back in 2014, talking about Aleister Crowley and his other book, Abomination, about the West Memphis 3. He has kind of a different bent on that case than most people do. He thinks that they are guilty of what they did. But we're not going to be talking about that. May mention a little bit about that, but we're going to talk about his book, Children of the Beast, which is, as I said before, people that have been influenced by Aleister Crowley, how Crowley's philosophy has kind of permeated society. And I think that was, especially with people like Alan Moore and apparently Grant Morrison. I mean, you think about Alan Moore, how much you have Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, V for Vendetta, how much from Hell, how much of his stuff has been made, into film. And he's very influential in the culture. So we're going to be talking about that. Also going to talk a little bit about Pizzagate too, some of his studies on it, and see where we are at with that at the moment. I really want to get his thoughts on that and his opinions. Someone that's looked into it a little bit more than we have. So Rob, if nothing else to add, I think we'll call it.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks everyone for listening.
Absolutely. Tell everybody about our Patreon and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So, first of all, we love all the feedback that we get from you guys on Facebook or through email, or, we started doing this Patreon thing to kind of congeal that all a little bit more, give you guys a little extra, kind of make it worth your while. And at the same time, help us pay a fraction of the electric bill and the hosting costs. So you can go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal. Or there's links from our webpage at www.conspirinormal.com. There's also a donate button on the website. If you don't want to subscribe, you don't want a monthly thing, but just want to contribute, you can throw us, anything through there as well. Or another way, if you don't want to spend money, which I totally understand, is go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to the show and just give us a quick little 5-star rating and a little review, because we really enjoy that. And I think that occasionally we piss somebody off, and those people are way more likely to post a review than all of you wonderful people that like the show. So,
we did get a good review the other day, though.
We did. And I'd like to start reading some of those. I mean, we've read some of the bad ones, especially if they have constructive criticism, because we do appreciate that as well.
Sure.
We love you guys. And if you like the show, just take 30 seconds or a minute out of your life and go do that. And we greatly appreciate it.
Well, let's see here. Let's see. Let me pull up that new review. This is a good review. I think for some reason, cannot see it.
Oh,
which I could see it the other day, but that's weird. Anyway, it was a review about how they like some of our reviews, and especially stuff about like how we talk about esoteric things.
Nice.
But for some reason, iTunes is being cooperative and not one of my most listened to esoteric podcasts. I really enjoy Adam's interviewing style and the diversity of guests that this podcast provides. I have been impressed with the breadth of Adam's knowledge of history and the esoteric. I also like the fact that the show doesn't take itself too seriously. Recommended. That's from JIF Pez. So
thank you, Mr. Pez. And we'll read a few more next week.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Join us next time on
Conspirinormal.
And there's nothing from Luke this week.
Oh.
No snappy comebacks.